Quiet Strength, Chapter 16, A Birthday Blessing. Mike Vandergat, our kicker, contributed to a rocky beginning for our 2003 season. Shortly into the offseason, Mike gave a wide-ranging interview that, well, let's just say I wish he would have phrased some things differently. Coming off our 41-0 loss to the Jets, Mike appeared on a Canadian TV station. He mostly talked about how frustrated he was about our loss, but the comments that seemed to get the most notice were those aimed at Peyton Manning and me. Mike hinted that the leadership of the team was insufficient. He said the team needed somebody who's going to get in the people's face and yell and scream, and that I was too mild-mannered and even-keeled for us to be successful. My first reaction was that he was just going to have to get used to it. This is the way I coach, and I believed then and believe now that it's the best way to win football games and lead people. I had grown up with that philosophy. My mom used to say that a good leader gets people to follow him because they want to, not because he makes them, a principle reinforced by Coach Knoll. He always told me that players want to be good and that it's the coach's job to teach them and give them the tools they need to improve. I never have been the type to get in people's faces, and I never will be. My second reaction to Mike's comments was to release or trade him. What he had said was completely unacceptable. We were a team, and neither he nor anyone else could put himself above the group. I called Mike at his home in Toronto and told him I needed to see him as quickly as possible. I never liked cut days during training camp. Those are the days when we have to reduce our roster from 80 players down to 65, and then finally to 53. Cut days are my least favorite days in coaching. No matter how long you've been a coach, I don't think you ever get used to it. Usually the guys you have to release have done nothing wrong. On the contrary, they've done everything you've asked them and have gone to the limits of their ability. But in the end, they simply are not as talented or they don't fit our schemes as well as someone else. Imagine how hard that would be. It's like you have this talented guy and he's done every single thing you've asked him and worked to his maximum capacity and talent, but he's just not quite good enough, or he doesn't quite fit in with your program and you have to cut him. That would be so devastating and hard to do. At least I think so. I actually make it worse on myself because I bring each player in to talk with me personally, just as Coach Perkins did with me. Sometimes I have a great deal to say, other times I keep it short. But it's awkward and painful every time. I used to think that all head coaches did that, until I received a call from an agent who wanted to thank me for the way I had released his client. It was the player's third time being cut, he told me, but the first time that a coach had ever spoken to him personally. That surprised me, but it also reinforced my resolve to continue doing it that way, no matter how tough it was. A philosophical tension always seems to exist between personnel departments and coaches. As they bring in new players, the personnel people are usually looking for that diamond in the rough. The reality is, however, when you're releasing the 85th best guy on your roster in August and signing someone who isn't on a roster anywhere, that replacement is likely to be very rough and usually not a diamond. More importantly, however, is the fact that I believe strongly in the idea of the team as a family. I can't very well preach unity and tell the guys we're all in this together and everybody's important, then cut a guy because we might improve by 1% if we bring in someone else. Again, it was probably going back to my playing days. I was never a star, and I know what it was like to be a bottom-of-the-roster guy. I will never cut a player just to keep the other guys on their toes, as some do. I don't generally like to make individual cuts either, unless unusual circumstances force me to. But there are times when a player needs to be removed from the team, and that time was now. I was steamed. And after our loss to the Jets, no one else was in a good mood either. At our final team meeting, I had told the players that we had to stick together, that people were going to try to pick us apart and get us splintered in different directions. I didn't think it would happen from within, but that's exactly where it was coming from now. I was burning. Mike Vandergat was finished with the Colts, and the sooner he got to Indianapolis for me and cut him, the better. Okay, so Tony Rice thinking about how to handle this situation. Mike, their kicker, has spoken out against him and Peyton Manning and the leadership on the team. And right, his first reaction is, okay, you know what, he's just going to have to suck it up and deal with it because that's the way I run this team. His second reaction is, we don't need that kind of attitude on this team. I'm just going to, cut this guy, trade him. He's done with the Colts. And so ultimately that's what Tony decides he is going to do, right? That Mike is finished with the Colts. Mike still had to travel from Toronto to Indianapolis. Before he arrived, my son Jamie intervened. Jamie and Eric were often around the facility in those days, hanging out in my office or around the guys. While Eric usually kept to himself, Jamie was always looking to make new friends. He generally believed that anyone he met was a potential friend. If anyone even so much as smiled at Jamie, it was a confirmation enough that he had added another friend to the ranks. Jamie seemed especially drawn to people who were down on their luck, like talkative kickers. Jamie had been reading the sports pages, and he came into my office to ask me about the situation. "What is everybody mad at Mike, Dad?" "Because of what he did." "Dad, you can't get rid of Mike. He's my friend." "I can promise you this, Jamie," I said, trying to reassure my concerned 16-year-old. "I won't do anything just because of what other people are saying or because of what's in the paper. I plan to bring him in here and talk to him. If I do decide to get rid of him, it will only be because the team needs it." Jamie seemed pacified, at least for a moment, but I knew he was still giving it a great deal of thought. Mike took 2 days to get to Indianapolis from Toronto. If he had arrived the night I first called him, I'm sure I would have cut him or asked Bill Pullian, our president, to trade him. The following day, I still felt the same way. But on the third day, I was reading our daily Bible passage. A number of us, both coaches and players, were still reading through the Bible each year. It was Matthew 21, 28 through 32, a parable Jesus told about a father and 2 sons. The father told the 2 sons to go work in the vineyard. The first son said he would not go, but later changed his mind and went anyway. The second son said he would go, but then he didn't. Jesus' point is that the first son was obedient in spite of his words. It's what's in our hearts that matters, even if our words say otherwise. I immediately realized that my situation was very similar to this parable. I had heard Mike's words in the press and rushed to judgment without hearing his side of the story. Because he had done the very thing I'd warned our team not to do during our last team meeting, I was still inclined to cut him. But I knew I needed to hear what was in his heart before I made my decision. I still didn't think there was anything he could say to change my mind, but I knew I had to hear Mike's side. When Mike finally came in, he didn't deny making those statements, and he did apologize. He said he had been frustrated, and he explained that the media had not reported what he had been trying to say. Things had not come out the way he had wanted them to. We talked through his comments at length. I told him he had done damage to our team that would be difficult to undo, and I would have to think that through. Then I asked him the most important question. "Do you still want to kick for the Colts?" He immediately said that he did, more than anything in the world. He had no desire to go anywhere else. He believed we could be successful, and he wanted to be a part of that journey. It's amazing how many times my assigned daily scripture reading has been something I needed to read, fitting exactly where I was and what I was going through at the time. That day, I decided that leading as Jesus would lead meant looking into Mike's heart. After talking with Mike, I went against the advice I was getting from most of the football experts and decided to keep him on our team. So here we have Tony getting advice from his son, Jamie. "Hey, you can't, cut Mike. He's my friend. He's a good guy." Tony promises his son, "Okay, I'll really think through the situation before I make any big decisions." And then in his Bible reading, he reads Matthew 21, 28 through 32 about the 2 sons, right? And it says that the first son said he would not go, but later changed his mind and went anyway. And the second son said he would go, but then he didn't, right? He went back on his word. And so Mike was like, "Okay, Tony said, "Okay, it's what's in our hearts that matter. And I need to have a conversation with Mike to see what's truly in his heart and not just base my decision off of what was said in the interview." And after talking to Mike and hearing Mike's heart, Tony decides that Mike is going to stay on the team, which again, I think just shows how Tony never rushes to make a decision. He always takes his time and really thinks it through and prays about it, because I think other people out there would have, fired Mike or cut him from the team or traded him and just wouldn't have even listened to his side of the story. Later that summer, I found myself penning my annual letters to Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks. This tradition had begun in 1996, when I wrote a short note to Warren about the things we were going to need from him if we wanted to win that year. Joe Green, the cornerstone player of those great 1970 Steelers teams, had once told me about the way Coach Knoll had challenged him to be a great player and a great leader. In 1996, I knew we needed Warren to play at an incredibly high level to set the bar for the rest of the team. So I wrote him a letter. Warren Sapp was one of the most unique personalities I've ever had the privilege of meeting. Despite his reputation, he was always a joy to coach because he had tremendous desire to win. He's tough to figure out sometimes and can be quite volatile, but he's genuine and, though he doesn't always want you to know it, he's pretty soft-hearted. He's also incredibly intelligent. He can, and will, give educated opinions on everything from global warming to Middle East politics. That first year, Warren responded well to my preseason letter, so I kept it up. My letters moved from talking about individual goals for Warren to season goals, encouraging him as a leader of the defense. 4 years later, Derek, Warren's roommate in training camp and on the road, found out about the letters. He insisted that I write to him as well. When I left the Buccaneers, I faced a dilemma. Should I stop writing to Warren and Derek? They weren't my players anymore, but my relationship with those two guys was not just about their play on the field. I knew they would continue to be outstanding athletes. What I really wanted was for them to step up and take leadership roles. They needed to make sure everyone stayed together, followed the new coach, and continued to improve. As long as they played, I would be watching them continue to make me proud. I decided to keep writing to them. And if my words helped Warren and Derek have more productive seasons, I figured John Gruden and Monty Kiffin wouldn't mind. So this is kind of like a random story that Tony tells us, but again, I think it's just reinforcing the idea of like being relational and being intentional with people in your life. And yes, people, move away or, change schools or whatever, but, how intentional were you actually with them? And just because you don't see them every day, you still need to foster those relationships. And I think it's important to, send a message sometimes or whatnot to let people know like, hey, we're thinking about them, we care about them, we're praying for them, and so on and so forth. And that's what Tony does there with Warren and Derek. Despite the Vandergat incident, we started the regular 2003 season hot. At the end of September, we are 4-0 and looking for our fifth straight win. We were playing well on both sides of the ball, and Mike Vandergat was kicking well. Our fifth game was a matchup straight out of a Hollywood script. On October 6th, on Monday Night Football, and my 48th birthday, we would play the defending Super Bowl champions in my old team, the Buccaneers, in Tampa, no less. When you talk about the stress, right, you leave a team, they automatically basically win a Super Bowl, or they do win a Super Bowl, and now you have to go play them with your new team in their city, right, in Tampa. I tried to keep things as normal as possible that week. I remembered all too well a situation we had faced while I was at Tampa Bay after we had traded with the Jets for Keyshawn Johnson. When we played the Jets the following year, Rich McKay and I let Key have a separate press conference before the normal media session. We figured that way he could address all the New York questions at once. Then the distractions would die down and we could get back to normal. Unfortunately, it had the opposite effect. With all the attention focused on him, Key made some comments that really stirred things up in New York. I think it also gave our team the impression that there was something different about that game. Now, having learned that lesson, I was determined to keep the preparation for the Colts-Bucs game the same as it had been every other week. I didn't allow any extra interview time, even with those Tampa reporters I had known for 6 years. I prayed all week that it would be a smooth return to Tampa and that I wouldn't get too emotional, high or low. The week went by fairly smoothly, but Monday night did turn out to be an incredibly emotional evening for me. Pre-game was such a special experience as I visited with the Buccaneers coaches, players, and staff on the field. I was experiencing so many emotions and so many good memories. I'm afraid I wasn't of much use to the Colts during pregame, as I spent most of my time trying not to cry. We headed off the field and returned to the visitors' locker room to await kickoff. Before that day, I had never been in that locker room, and I had never come onto the field through the visitors' tunnel. I was a little anxious about the pregame introductions. In the NFL, each team introduces either its starting offense or defense, followed by the head coach. I usually don't pay much attention to that introduction. That's my time to look at the corners of the stadium. But this time I wasn't sure how I would react. Jamie and Eric were with me on the field, and Lauren and Tiara were in the stands with friends. I wondered how the crowd would respond to me. I didn't know what they thought of me anymore. As we got closer to kickoff, I realized that the crowd's reaction mattered a great deal to me. I knew I would get some boos. After all, I was now on the opposing sideline. But Tampa had been our home for 6 years, and the people of that community were an important part of our lives. I hoped that, in spite of my having left the Bucs, the people of our old community would be welcoming. I just didn't know what to expect. I was caught completely by surprise when the crowd erupted with applause as soon as my name was called. I was overwhelmed. The tears I'd fought back earlier could no longer be quelled. I didn't know it then, but this would not be the last time the fans of Tampa would rally around me. The ovation was a very moving moment, but it was long gone by the time we returned to the locker room at halftime, trailing 21-0. We hadn't played our game at all. The Buccaneers' top-ranked defense had given up only 86 yards to us in the first half, while our sixth-ranked defense had been torched for 239 yards. I was extremely disappointed. Here we had a chance to show the country what we were all about, and so far we responded by self-destructing. We had nobody to blame but ourselves. So Tony's really nervous about this game and going back to Tampa, and he's not sure how the fans are going to react, if they're going to be, positive, negative, whatnot. And he basically gets a standing ovation from the fans, right? They just erupt in applause when he comes out on the field, and he has a hard time not crying about it. And he feels very loved because he feels like he poured a lot of his life into Tampa and building the community and, doing different outreach programs with the community. And so it's a very special homecoming for him. Unfortunately, the team is doing terribly, and the Colts are losing at halftime to the Bucs 21-0. We couldn't have played any worse than we did in the first 30 minutes of the game, even though I had preached all week to our guys that we couldn't afford to fall behind against Tampa Bay. I had explained over and over that if the Bucs defense knew we had to pass, their pass rush would tee off. Their defense was too strong if we were playing from behind. At halftime, I explained that we needed to do what we do, with passion and execution, and see what happened. The guys responded, initially. We came out and scored on our opening drive to make it 21-7, but the Bucs then drove the length of the field for a touchdown, and the third quarter ended with us still down by 21. We scored another touchdown to start the fourth quarter, but then, with just over 5 minutes left in the game, Bucs cornerback Ron Barber picked off a pass from Peyton and ran it back for a Tampa Bay touchdown and a 35-14 lead. I'd been in this position many times with the Buccaneers defense, and it was never pretty for the opposing offense. I turned to Tom Moore before the kickoff. Our offense was set to go back onto the field, but I felt there was no point in getting anyone hurt now. Playing on Monday night meant we had a short week to prepare for our next game. I thought we ought to take the first group off the field, especially since the Bucs' defensive line would be coming full bore with a big lead. Let's get Peyton and the other starters out of there. Tony, let's just go one more drive and see what happens, Tom counseled. Brad Pyatt ran the kickoff back 87 yards to Tampa's 12-yard line, and we sent the first-team offense back out there. 4 plays later, we scored, 35-21. We tried an onside kick and recovered the ball. We scored again, stopped them, and scored a third time to tie the game and send it into overtime. We had scored 3 touchdowns in the last 3 minutes and 43 seconds of the game. We won in overtime, 38-35, when Mike Vandergat kicked a field goal. As I walked back to the locker room, it dawned on me. The Lord had allowed us to win, but only in a way in which He had to get the credit. No NFL team had ever come back from 3 touchdowns behind in the final 4 minutes, but we did it while playing poorly, on the road, on Monday Night Football, against the Super Bowl champions with the top defense in the NFL, in Tampa, on my birthday. Okay, how cool is that? And it's crazy to think about, right, that they had scored 3 touchdowns in the last 3 minutes and 43 seconds of the game. That's wild. It was nothing short of miraculous. Such a thing is almost impossible to imagine, but nothing is impossible for God to accomplish. Back in the locker room, Lauren had a cake waiting, and the guys sang happy birthday to me. John Lynch, Tampa Bay's all-pro strong safety, waited for me to come out of the locker room so he could give me a hug, even though by that time it was approaching 2 a.m. That game gave us all a new perspective on faith and the way God works in circumstances of our lives. It also reinforced what we already knew, that if we do what we do without panicking, we can accomplish great things. We would draw on that lesson in the future. A few weeks later, we again traveled to Florida for a division game against the Jaguars. We were preparing for kickoff under gray skies with a light, cool breeze blowing off the St. Johns River across the stadium. Suddenly, I was tapped on the shoulder by a security officer. "Coach, I'm sorry, but your son can't be on the sideline." I was startled, and it took me a moment to realize he was talking about Eric, who was 11 at the time and had been at my side for various games, when it wasn't Jamie's turn, for the last 4 seasons. "No," I said, "he is going to stay here with me for the game." The guard was firm. "Sorry, Coach, but he can't be on the sideline. League rules." I was just as firm. As our debate continued, I heard through my headset that the guys were about to take the field. He's been doing this since he was 7. He'll be right here with me." "Sorry, he's going to have to go." This had gone on long enough. "He's staying with me." "Coach," I refused to allow the interruption. "And if you remove him from this sideline, I'm taking my team to the locker room, we'll word change, and then leave on our buses. You can explain to Wayne, Weaver, the Jaguars owner, Why, he's refunding everyone's money. The guard blinked, and I finished my thought. You might want to double check with your head coach before you do that, however. That was the last I heard of the issue. No one has brought it up since. It was kind of bold of him to go against that officer, but I guess, again, it just shows how much he really values time with his family and wants his sons to be a part of his life. Of course, Eric is now as tall as I am, and I'm wondering when Jordan will be ready for a trip to Jacksonville. The other two games were noteworthy for me that season. At the end of November, we hosted the New England Patriots. Just like the Tampa Bay game, we played poorly at first and had to claw our way back, scoring a touchdown 12 seconds before halftime to cut their lead to 17-10. One of the decisions I always have to make is our kickoff strategy. When the opponent has a dangerous return man or when there's very little time left, teams often squib kick the ball to prevent a long return. With 12 seconds left to go in the half, I inexplicably decided to kick it deep. Bethel Johnson ran it back for a touchdown and a 24-10 halftime lead for New England. One of my dumbest decisions ever. In the second half, we fell behind by 21 again, but came back to tie it. Tampa all over again. This time, however, New England scored, and the game ended with us on their 1-yard line, unable to score the winning touchdown. The other memorable game was our final game of the regular season against Houston. We needed a win for the division title, but we fell behind by 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Then Peyton handed off to Aaron James for a touchdown to start the comeback. With 3:50 remaining, our wide receiver Brandon Stokely made an acrobatic catch to tie the Texans. We ended up winning the game on the final play, a 43-yard field goal by Mike Vanderdat. So that's twice now where their kicker Mike has come through for them this season. And just think what might not have been if Tony had decided to cut him from the Colts. With that kick, Mike cinched a home playoff game for the Colts and set an NFL record by making his 41st consecutive field goal. As the guys carried Mike off the field, I looked at Jamie, who was running alongside me. "Good call," I told him. He flashed me his big, bright smile. We opened the 2003 playoffs at home against Denver, who had beaten us just 2 weeks earlier. They had run against us at will in a game we had needed for our first-round bye. Instead, we lost 31-17. Now that we were in the playoffs, the media asked what we were going to do differently. "Nothing," I told them. "We're going to do what we always do, only do it better." And we did. We drilled Broncos 41-10 in a game in which everything went right. We then traveled to play the number 2 seed, Kansas City. It was a terrific time for me, returning to Kansas City and good memories of coaching with the Chiefs. They hadn't lost any home games during the regular season, and they had one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL. We stayed hot on offense, though, winning the game 38-31. In 2 playoff games, we had scored 10 touchdowns without a single punt. Now we were headed to New England for a rematch of the November game. The AFC Championship and a trip to the Super Bowl were on the line. Countless times that week, people pointed out that if we had only scored from the 1-yard line during the regular season, we would be hosting the game in Indianapolis rather than playing in New England. I kept thinking about that kickoff to Bethel Johnson with 12 seconds to go in the first half. The game started slowly for us. We had trouble moving the ball and turned it over a couple of times. The Patriots controlled the tempo and kept the ball away from us with a good offensive game plan. They took the lead and held it throughout the game. As bad as it was, though, we got the ball back on the last few minutes, down 21-14. We needed one good drive to tie the game. All year we had converted in these situations, and I was confident we could do it this time. But once again, the New England defense stopped us when it counted. As insurance field goal by Adam Veneretti made the final score 24-14. The New England Patriots rarely made mistakes, and they knew how to capitalize on the mistakes of their opponents. They were the epitome of what Coach Knoll had always talked about. They did the ordinary things better than everyone else. And because of that, I knew we would continue to have our problems with them, just as everyone else did. Coaching the Pro Bowl that year was completely different from coaching it in 1999. 4 years earlier, the Tampa Bay staff was excited about getting to the championship game, but fearful because we didn't have the confidence of our owners. In 2003, we were down about losing the championship game, but we knew that everyone in the organization believed we were heading in the right direction. I was trusting that the Lord had our future in His hands, and I took comfort in these words of encouragement from Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." While I knew very well from my own experience that nothing is guaranteed, I also knew we were a good team. The guys were really beginning to buy into the mission and strategies we had been teaching. About halfway through the 2003 season, I could see the light go on for Peyton. He was seeing the progress our defense was making and didn't feel the need to take as many risks. Tom Moore and our quarterback coach, Jim Caldwell, had done such a good job preparing him that we were productive with significantly fewer turnovers. At some point during the 2003 season, Jim Irsay began having my dad fly with us to our away games. This was typical of the little things Jim does for all his employees, not just the head coach. So my dad was at the New England game, as he had been just about every one of my games since I was 12 years old. For the 6th time, he saw my season end with a playoff loss. He was disappointed we hadn't played well enough to win, but he never changed his expression or demeanor. He told me not to get discouraged and that he knew we'd get to the Super Bowl if we continued to persevere. So that season, right, it goes pretty well for Tony and the Colts overall. They play well. They have some close games, but, right, they make it pretty far into the playoffs, eventually losing to New England, so they do not make it to the Super Bowl. But overall, Tony is really happy about that season. It's a good season. The owner of the Colts, Jim Irsay, right, begins to allow his dad to fly with them to the away games, and so he's able to have some special memories there with his dad that year.